So when I was 18, I asked my parents for money to go out with friends, right? They gave it to me. When I was 22, I needed a laptop. I asked, they bought it. When I was 25, I ran out of money between jobs. I asked, they wired it. And here's the thing, I wasn't a bad kid. I did well in school. I wasn't causing problems. So my parents thought they were helping me. They were making sure I didn't fall. They were keeping me stable. But what they were actually doing was leaving the training wheels on. And by the time I was 30 years old, living back in my parents' house, I realized something devastating. I'd never learned to balance. Today I want to talk about a mistake most parents make without realizing it. And it's not about being too strict or too lenient. It's about leaving the training wheels on too long. And here's why that's catastrophic. By the way, if this already sounds familiar, if your son is drifting, avoiding challenges, or pulling back from anything difficult, I put together a free 7-day parent clarity challenge that explains why he's stuck and what's actually going on under the surface. You can start day one anytime. Links in the description. So let me explain what I mean by training wheels. When a kid is learning to ride a bike, training wheels serve a purpose. They prevent catastrophic falls, right? They let the kid get comfortable with pedaling, steering, and the basic mechanics. But here's the thing about training wheels. They're not teaching balance. Balance is the actual skill of riding a bike. Balance can only be learned by falling, catching yourself, adjusting, falling again, and building the muscle memory through repetition. Training wheels bypass that entire process. And if you leave them on too long, something interesting happens. The kid knows intellectually how bikes work. They understand pedaling, steering, braking. They can explain it to you. But the second you take the training wheels off, they fall. Because knowing how a bike works and being able to ride a bike are two completely different things. And that's exactly what happened to me with becoming financially independent. So most parents fall into one of three traps when it comes to teaching boys about effort and rewards. Trap number one, they bribe the kid to keep pedaling. If you ride your bike to the end of the driveway, I'll give you €5. This teaches boys that the only reason to pedal is to get something external. It creates transactional thinking. Trap number two, they never take the training wheels off. This was my parents. They just kept giving me money whenever I needed it because that's what loving parents do, right? They provide, they prevent the fall. But here's what I never learned. How to balance when the support is gone. Trap number three, they demand the kid ride without training wheels before teaching them how. You should ride your bike because it's good exercise. You should do it for the virtue of cycling. This sounds noble, but if you haven't taught a boy how to balance first, you're just demanding mastery from someone who hasn't developed the foundational skill. All three traps fail for the same reason. They skip the part where the boy has to practice balancing on his own. So here's what most parents don't understand about adolescent development. David Yeager, a psychologist who spent 15 years studying teenage motivation, discovered something crucial. Teenagers don't crave comfort or ease. What they crave is the feeling of earned competence. When a boy struggles with something hard, falls, catches himself, adjusts, and finally succeeds, that's when his brain lights up. That's when he feels capable. But if you never let him fall, if the training wheels are always on, his brain never learns that feedback loop. And without it, he has no idea how to function when reality takes the training wheels off. This is what happened to me. Between ages 13 and 33, I had what psychologists call declarative knowledge about effort and reward, meaning I could tell you intellectually that hard work leads to results, but I didn't have procedural knowledge, the practiced ability to actually balance when things got difficult. Because I'd never fallen, I'd never caught myself, I'd never adjusted and tried again. The training wheels were always on. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset explains why this matters so much. When boys are praised for being smart or talented, for things they didn't earn, they develop what she calls a fixed mindset. They start to believe their value comes from what they are, not what they do. And when they encounter difficulty, they interpret it as evidence that they're not naturally talented, so they avoid it. But when boys are praised for effort, for perseverance, for practicing until they get it, they develop a growth mindset. They start to believe their value comes from what they practice and from the challenges they overcome. And when they encounter difficulty, they interpret it as an opportunity to build the skill. This is why leaving the training wheels on is so dangerous. It's like you're teaching your son that his value comes from being supported, protected, and not falling. not from learning to balance on his own. If you want to go deeper and actually understand how boys build discipline through practice, I built a 7-day clarity challenge inside my Lighthouse Parents community. Each day you get one short lesson that unpacks exactly what's going on with your son and how the mentor-led process works. It's free, and you can jump into day 1 through the link below. So let me be specific about what this cost me. Between ages 22 and 30, I drifted. Syracuse, Los Angeles, Berlin, Warsaw, Montpellier, Munich, back to my parents' house at age 28, and eventually back to Warsaw. Yes, I lived in all these different places, looking for myself, right? But never making the breakthrough of learning how to balance on my own. Not because I didn't understand the theory of balance, but because I'd never practiced balancing without support. I knew in theory I needed thick skin, especially if I wanted to be my own boss, and yet I kept running away from every job I ever held down. I didn't have the synaptic strength to sit in discomfort long enough to build competence. Daniel Siegel's neuroscience research explains the mechanism. Learning requires focused attention, which produces BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which strengthens synaptic connections through myelination. That's how practice creates automatic skills. That's how balance becomes second nature. But I had never put in enough focused reps for those neural pathways to form. It's like someone who wants to lose weight, right? They know they need to stop eating junk food, but when push comes to shove, they still eat it. I could talk about effort and outcome, but when the training wheels came off, I couldn't do it. So here's what parents need to understand. There are 2 phases every boy needs to go through. Check this out. Phase 1 is learning to balance. This is where you take the training wheels off and let him fall. You give him challenges where he has to create value, where he has to struggle, and where he has to catch himself and adjust. You mow lawns, you get paid. You solve a problem, you get recognized. You create something people want, you get compensated. This isn't about being transactional. This is about instilling the fundamentals of what will define the majority of your son's life. Being of value. As a man, he will always be measured by his performance. If you want to be scientific about it, this is about building the neural circuits for balance. Skip this phase at your own risk. Phase number 2, riding for purpose. Once a boy has learned to balance, once he can ride without support, then you can teach him why riding matters. This is where virtue develops, becoming the kind of man who does excellent work, not just for rewards, but because that's who he is. Boys who are taught to ride for virtue without first learning to balance end up either entitled or paralyzed. So how do you actually take the training wheels off? Not by bribing pedaling, not by keeping him propped up forever, not by demanding he ride before he's practiced balancing. You take them off deliberately in a controlled way with real challenges that have real stakes. In the Lighthouse Method, our 6-week program, weeks 1 through 4, we build the foundation. Self-awareness, inner freedom, accessing personal power, social skills. Week 5, we take the training wheels off. Boys learn value creation using Alex Hormozi's framework, how to identify problems, solve them, and get compensated. We give them real challenges where they have to create something, where they have to fall and catch themselves, where they build the neural circuits for balance through repetition. Week 6, once they can balance, we teach them why it matters. We introduce Joseph Campbell's hero's journey and the idea of serving something larger than yourself. This is where virtue begins to develop. Not as a replacement for balance, but as the reason for riding. But we couldn't start with week 6. Boys need week 5 first. So here's what you're aiming for. A man who can balance on his own, who knows that effort produces results, that struggle builds competence, and who rides with purpose, who does excellent work, not just for rewards, but because that's who he is. But if you never take the training wheels off, if you keep supporting him so he never has to balance, you rob him of the foundational skill. And without that skill, he'll spend years trying to figure out why he can't ride when everyone else can. I don't want your son to waste a decade learning what I had to learn the hard way. If your son is drifting and avoiding discomfort, start the free 7-day Parent Clarity Challenge. It'll give you answers and a real plan. Links in the description. And if this resonated, watch my video on why telling your son he's smart is making things worse. It's called the ability praise trap. That's next.